Welcome to the Solar Coaster, a renewable energy themed talk show right here in lovely Maui County.
Well, you'll work. You'll work. All right, go.
Okay.
Hold on, now it's coming from the.
Yeah, it's right
there.
Yeah,
See, it's coming from the battery. Oh,
so
you have 4 hours and 12.
Yeah,
4 hours and 12.
yeah.
4:20. Let's go. 12.
let's do a couple of shots.
Aloha.
Aloha.
Aloha. Look at that. That's 3 OGs here at Hawaii Energy Conference 2024. Did I start this already? I did. We're recording. I got Emily Erickson. I got Neal Martin. These are good friends of mine, former colleagues at our solar installation business back early in the day. I think we're all happy to have moved on to other bigger, greater, wonderful things. How you all doing? You having fun?
Yeah, this is I guess my 10th conference. I was just thinking, it's been around for 10 years. I've been here since the beginning. And it's great. It's great to be back. It's great to see all the friendly faces in the energy industry. We don't get together like this enough.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think this is probably my 5th conference or so. It's always good to see industry networking events and get to see everyone here, and even people nationally. I think it's pretty cool. People flying in from all over come to this, so really good to get their feedback as well.
A hell of a time, right? After the fires, right? To be having this kind of, it's a resiliency themed conversation. We're about to go into geotherm in about half an hour. That's the next session. Did you see any sessions throughout yesterday or today that were particularly interesting to you, either of you?
I'm working on a project with biofuels, so I enjoyed the biofuel panel. You know, Bob King is it's always great to hear from Bob King. He's enlightening. And just the whole panel in general. So I liked that one. It's great to be talking about renewable fuels. I think transportation is, one of our biggest hurdles that we have here in energy. So bringing that aspect in for the aviation fuel is really important to be talking about.
Yeah, I think for me, it was cool to see Governor Josh Green. I actually texted him. He texted back, even with his photo, so it was actually him.
Can I get that number? Because I didn't write it down, and I got
after. Yeah, I'll give it to you. But I think it was clear to see what government, both federal, state, even county, are looking to do to push this faster through the agendas and some of the programs they're working on. But I still think everyone is clearly stating that it's still moving too slow, and some of the things we're talking about on just resiliency, energy storage, shifting, and implementing programs to help expedite that adoption into renewable. I think it'd be curious to see on some of these past conferences of like what's been addressed in those past ones up to date and what's kind of still similar problems that we've already had, such as like permitting we've been talking about, and trying to move those things along to get things moving at a faster clip.
Yeah, in the solar battery world, where we all kind of got cut our teeth, so to speak, that is this new docket, which changed kind of all the rules for the incentives on solar plus battery. That seems to be the big question mark, right? So it's like, are they going to, they meaning is the PUC and the consumer advocate and the utility, ultimately it's offering the program, are they going to be able to come up with an incentive structure that makes sense for people that want to put in solar and battery systems? Or are people just going to be like, I'll offset my usage as best I can and just call it a day? Because it looks very complicated. I don't know if you had a chance to check out those dockets, but they're like, it's all kinds of complexity and not easy to sell. I can imagine it would be tough to sell. Yeah. By the way, I talked to a couple guys that were doing what we used to do back in the day that are in it right now, and it seems like it's a pretty challenging time.
Yeah. Well, we were actually just talking about the battery incentive because we both are putting PV on our residential home, so he already did. And I am actually doing it. I know, I fought it because I really wanted to hold out for community solar because I think it's a wonderful idea. But
so you're doing solar battery now?
I am doing solar.
And you've already done it?
Yeah, but I did the battery bonus as well.
Bonus? Yeah. And I'm getting the battery bonus with mine as well. So yeah.
I've done a CSS system, so it took us about 10 years.
Yeah, I know. It's kind of funny, right? But I finally bit the bullet because the battery incentive was so good, So
I got to ask you about that because I have something similar happening in my place right now. So I find it interesting. I always say to people I had to sell about 400 solar systems before I could actually put one on my own house. And you guys know.
House first. It was hard to get the house, I think.
Not easy to buy.
First things I did once I got the house.
Not easy to buy a house in Maui. Well, we all did it. I guess that's a congratulations, guys. Nice job. Thank you so much. Good to see you again. These are the OGs from the early days of solar and solar sales in Maui. So my good friends. Thanks, guys.
I don't know. I don't know how it works. It does though. It works. All right. We go this way? See you.
All right. So we're here with Genesis Young, MD. Nice to meet you, sir. Thanks so much for coming on the solar coaster. How's it going today?
Very well, thank you. It's a beautiful day in Maui.
Absolutely. In fact, we just got some cloud cover. We got the beautiful mountains in the back, the West Maui's there. And my good friend Paul, who's right behind us, mentioned that you were working on some really amazing things, very timely things here in energy in Hawaii. And it's exactly the thing that I was hoping to be able to chat a little bit about at this particular 11th year we have for the Maui Energy Conference, Hawaii Energy Conference in 2024, and that's about a co-op, right? It's the obvious discussion point. The utilities in a very kind of a fragile, precarious time right now, and you have a discussion going, you have groups working, and you're discussing the idea of a co-op, which is on everyone's lips. So, tell us a little bit about yourself, your organization. Let's just get the conversation going.
Yeah, so I'm Genesis Young, and I'm the director of Terran James Young Foundation. And our foundation's mission is for peace and sustainability, so this is more of the sustainability side. And so we've been facilitating a conversation about a Maui energy co-op, and then they also came together with another group that was working on Maui's energy future, wanted to look at how we could take our power back, and those two groups have kind of come together. We've sort of been calling ourselves the Maui Community Energy Alliance. And so we've been exploring as a group what Maui's energy future might look like, and one of the options, of course, is to have a co-op like they have on Kauai, which has been very, very successful. And so we're working to see if we can duplicate that here, and this seems like the time to do it because of the stress that HECO is under. It may be an opportunity to switch over to a co-op. We'll see what happens and how that goes. We haven't approached HECO, we're just looking at options. I mean, HECO is an investor-owned utility, a for-profit company, so therefore it has to be beholden to its shareholders and do things in a certain way to make sure that it gets profit. And so that's one model. Another model would be a municipal owned, like Maui County, or another government could own the power company. And no one here in our group and that I talk to on the island wants the county to do that at all. I don't think we have confidence the county would want to do it or be able to do it effectively.
So when we think about what's after the IRA, the tax credits became kind of liberalized in their transferability, so there was opportunities to do a lot of things that counties couldn't do in the past, right? But I think that post-wildfire, there's maybe a lack of confidence in that happening at the county level. A co-op is a reasonable consideration. There's, from what I can see, there's only a couple of options that are known. When you have a utility right now that's kind of in a precarious time, they're facing a lot of liability from litigation from the wildfires. They've got a non-investment grade credit rating. And so there's the possibility of insolvency, right? That's the bottom line. Yeah. So if that's the case, and then what's interesting about that is we're talking about Big Island, Maui, and Oahu. But we have an example of KIUC that literally just showed the price that it has the lowest cost of electricity in Hawaii, and that wasn't always the case even 5 years ago. So we're just seeing the kind of mature results of what a cooperative can accomplish at this conference the other day. I never saw that graph that it wasn't Beth Tokioka, but it was another representative KIUC put up, where it showed the lowest cost of electricity.
The highest. Now it's the lowest. It was the highest, but it took 10 years. And I would expect if we were able to do a co-op here, it would take also at least 10 years for rates to adjust, because rates are going to undeniably go up no matter what, I think, no matter who owns or how the co-op or how the Maui energy system is run. and governed, those rates are probably going to go up. So,
well, there's a lot in this conversation, but what I understand is that there's funding available from the federal government for rural utilities. So I assume you're looking at that. I assume there are some analyses that are necessary. I know there were some analyses that were contracted back in the Arakawa administration. I don't know if those are still applicable to today, if variables can be changed out and they can be used as the basis for the costing of the implementation of a co-op, right? Is that kind of at the stage that you're at?
Yes, it's some of the part of the discussion that we're looking at how it would be capitalized, how you would fund it, where the money would come to support this operation, and there's federal funds available. And as you mentioned before, the rating now, the investor rating for HECO is dropped to a very, very low amount value, so they can't really fund and capitalize very easily now, whereas a co-op could actually be funded through federal programs and USDA grants, and other money apparently is available. I'm not the finance guy, I'm really just facilitating the group, talking and working towards a solution. And now what we're really wanting is more community input. We want to know, what does the community want, what would that look like, and the co-op model could be a stock owning or a non-stock owning co-op, and we would probably want to do a non-stock and put it inside a non-profit, so it's not profit motivated, where if you had a stock-owned co-op, that would be profit motivated. So we're looking to do the non-stock owning co-op within a 501c12 non-profit. That's what KIUC does now, so that model seems the most appropriate.
That sounds attractive, and I don't know all the nuances of it, but I would tend to vote in that direction, by the way. So, well, what's interesting, have you got a sense of if you found a model that worked and the funding that worked and the analyses showed the capital that was required and that it all made sense in this time period, do you have a sense of what that step-by-step might look like? I mean, I assume that, if I may, that if you were to think about the acquisition of the infrastructure of Hawaiian Electric, just in the case of Maui, whether it's Maui, Molokai, Lanai, or some variation of those three, that if you were to take that lower cost of acquisition of the existing infrastructure, that may make, that must be like a key piece of the assumption of it working financially, right?
Yes. Yes, we would hope that if there was an insolvency, that then that would allow it to be purchased at a lower rate, and that would help. And it wouldn't bring rates down right away, though, because there's so much work to be done. The infrastructure seems highly degraded throughout Maui, just looking at the leaning poles everywhere and the fires that we just had. And there's a lot of evidence there for the person on the ground to see without too much.
Right, so there's a lot of liability just in terms of all the stuff you would acquire and the things you'd have to do. But are we thinking about a co-op for, obviously we're not talking about Oahu and Big Island, so in the event that it would be able to happen, we'd be looking at Maui County, potentially some combination of Lanai, Molokai, and Maui proper, I'll call it?
Yeah, we're not sure if it would just be Maui Island or Lanai and Molokai. Molokai, of course, has their own thing they're doing, and I think that they probably will continue doing their own thing, but we're open to whatever. What we really need to do now, and what we're planning to do, is two things. One, we need to be ready so that if there's a co-op legally existing that could be the recipient of HECO should there be a bankruptcy, and we figure out how that would be funded. So that's one big thing, and we're working on that. And the other big thing, and the more important thing, is really to work with and reach out to the community, the whole community, and see what they want. That's what Molokai did, and spent a really great amount of time and energy, and we've spoken to Leilani a number of times about that, Leilani Chow, and she's helping us with that because that's what they really did well there. And it was not easy, it was painful, it took a lot of work, a lot of time, and a lot of money. And so we're just starting that process now because we've been meeting and figuring things out amongst this small group, and it's time to now really get more community input to our committees and just go around to each community and ask, because there's not much trust in Hawaii with new organizations or new ideas, and there's not much trust with the government, and there's just the whole situation here. There's so little trust. It would take a while, I think, to work to show that this is what we want to do together, and we really will have it in a situation that's not authoritarian or power over, but really with a power with structure. Even more so, I think, than the Kauai's co-op is. So we run it even more with more community input than that co-op has.
Well, it seems to me we have the benefit of the experience of KIUC to work off of, and then what Leilani Chow and the sustainability. There's a lot of great terms out there, but the groups out in the Molokai, the CRAP booklet that was produced. I actually have a copy at my house. It's amazing. So we're talking about perhaps implementing some of the lessons learned or some version of that in a 7,000 or 8,000 population island to 160, where are we at these days, 160,000 territory?
And we have some challenges. So what is the community here? We have many part-time residents. So is the community we access just full-time residents, or is it people with Hawaii's driver's license? So those are questions that need to be worked out as well. But I personally like to be as inclusive as possible. I would want any membership to the co-op to be everyone who uses electricity, not just who pays for it, but anyone who's using electricity on the island should be having a say in what's happening in their lives for this. And how do you do that? That's difficult, but inclusion is definitely one of my values and our values to try and figure this all out. So it's going to be different here than it is on Molokai and on Kauai, and maybe it won't happen. I'm not going to be attached to it. I just want to try and facilitate those conversations.
And what I heard here, of course, there's a big conversation. There's much to talk about in terms of technology, geography, process of getting buy-in and hearing ideas of what people want. I can speak as an individual, as a person who's lived in Maui for almost 16 years, that if there was an opportunity for a co-op to be formed, I would be very interested in that. And I would also be a little more tolerant of rates, although there isn't a lot of room in the family budget, but I would be tolerant of rates if I knew it were a co-op in contrast to a for-profit entity. Like, I personally have had enough experience with this that I would think that I'd be able to say, okay, let's give this a chance. Just as a homeowner, as an individual that's lived here, someone that's raised his kids here, child here. So that gets me very excited. So I'm glad you're doing the work that you're doing, and I'm excited to see other people that are in the conversation. Are there any? I think there's far more to talk about. But are there any words about the conference itself you can just share about what your experience is here?
Well, I'm here at the conference just trying to learn myself. It's the first time I've been to this conference, so I appreciate that it's the only one in the state. It's always been on Maui, so that's kind of cool. So I'm enjoying and appreciative for the sponsors of this.
Well, fantastic. This is Genesis Young, Maui Community Energy Alliance. Been a real pleasure to talk to you. Good luck. I hope you form a co-op.
Thank you. We'll see what happens.
Mr. Gregg, Kresge, good to see you again. We go back a long ways.
We do go back quite a ways.
Yeah. So we're sitting up here at the coffee area, the exhibition hall, after the first session on day 2, and we started to jump right into this conversation about EVs. That's your area. You're presently working at the World Resource Institute. Tell me a little bit about that organization.
Yeah, so we're a global think and do tank that is based out of Washington, D.C., but global across the world. We have offices in a lot of different countries, in Europe, in Brazil, and Colombia, and Indonesia, China. So there's a lot of work being done across the globe, especially when it comes to electrification of transportation. But we also deal with climate change and sustainability for people in general, and that's clean water, clean and accessible food. And of course with an equity lens over everything, which is trying to make sure that people aren't lost in the shuffle, and that those who are most disadvantaged are taken care of and receive benefits or money or the infrastructure that they need first.
It's we're at that stage, right, where we're able to think about not just the technology and the challenges of rolling out technology, but what are the implications of that technology once it's rolled out, right? Mm-hmm. So you're talking about water, you're talking about equity, you're talking about transpo, and these are the results of all of the hard work that's been done over the decades. In terms of renewable energy and the confidence in renewable energy and the mandates and actually getting to a place where we all have access to this clean energy. Let me ask you. We were just talking a little bit about school buses, and I love the idea of school buses. And I said to you, round hole, round peg, round hole, because there's such a great opportunity with all that ballast for a clean energy grid to utilize the storage, the rolling storage that's in a school bus. What's your thoughts on school buses here in Maui, anywhere around the world?
So the electric school bus in particular, it really provides a much cleaner environment. People don't realize that there's so much exposure to emissions and pollution. The kids and the drivers inside the bus are exposed on a regular diesel school bus. They're exposed to 12 times the amount of emissions inside the bus as opposed to outside the bus. And because of the way a diesel engine functions, a lot of times those buses are left idling at the curb, and there's a lot of exposure to those emissions just on a regular basis, especially in areas where there's transportation corridors and you've got a lot of these, whether it's buses or whether it's trucks or something else, and those tend to be more disadvantaged communities.
If I may, I'm kind of smiling because I remember as a child, I'm Gen X, right? I'm kind of like young Gen X, and I remember just walking through those plumes of fumes while they were busing us from one school to the next back in the day, and not much has changed if I'm understanding correctly.
Not much has changed, except now there's definitely a big movement, and in a lot of places there's mandates. Several states like California and New York and other places have these mandates for clean transportation. So there's clean transportation goals. Electric school buses or school buses are one of those. Electric school buses. So in addition, in a place like Hawaii, it makes perfect sense because we have in a lot of cases when the sun is shining and the wind is blowing, which we have quite often on Maui and Hawaii in general, you have this excess renewable energy condition in the middle of the day where in some cases that energy gets curtailed. So what's a better fit than to put that energy, those renewable electrons, into the batteries of transportation where fossil fuel use is the highest right now. The really hard to get to transportation devices will be like planes and probably ships, but the easy ones are like the electric school buses. They have long dwell times. They're sitting there most of the time. We want them to be grid assistive and use renewable energy to fuel them if we can.
Yeah, it's a really exciting opportunity. Just what I tend to think about is the like in a place like Maui, I don't know how many school buses we need. I did take a look at how many community regular buses we had. It was somewhere in the 60 unit territory, if I recall correctly. And so if it were something similar, from community busing to actual school buses, you could be looking at 100 units or somewhere in that territory for a small place like Maui. And then there tend to be about a megawatt hour of storage capacity apiece, right? That's in the general territory.
Well, no. So I mean, the size of the battery on the buses is typically around 200 kilowatt hours.
200 kilowatt hours
per bus, yeah. But so what makes that so good is that what's different from, say, a school bus, or even if you're looking at other vehicles that have similar sort of dwell times, like there's a lot of emphasis right now on other medium and heavy duty fleets like trash vehicles, rubbish vehicles, which they perform their routes in the morning. They're typically done early afternoon, and then they sit all the way until the very next morning. That tends to line up pretty well with like the solar peak that we have. If we can make some advancements in those areas. The ones that are a little bit more difficult to get to are like the transit buses. So you see a lot of hybrid, transit buses and vehicles coming out because that requires those buses and those vehicles are being used more often on a very regular basis with quick turnaround times and not a lot of time to charge and that sort of thing.
So it has a lot to do with the scheduling and the overlap of the solar day and then the peak demands and then the use of that particular transportation. You had mentioned something about the meeting of these two industries, the utility and energy generation, energy transportation industry, and then the vehicle industry, making cars, making buses. What were your thoughts on that?
Okay, so So I was recently at a conference in San Diego. We were talking about, it was a vehicle to grid forum, and so there were equipment manufacturers there at this forum that produce equipment for utilities, which often need to be UL listed in order for the utility to have faith in the device and make sure that it's going to be reliable and safe and perform as it's designed. And so those devices go through a really rigorous certification process. Meanwhile, at the same time, you have the vehicle industry that really responds very quickly to customer demand, and you'll see lots, and this is across the news, like you see these articles all the time. A certain car manufacturer will put out a new vehicle, but then they'll pull back on the production, and then they push back out again, and they pull back on the production. And it's this constant ebb and flow to respond to customer demand and the appetite for new vehicles. Electric vehicle industry has been extremely volatile in this regard. So while there is a lot of promise and potential in vehicles and school buses as well, we also are in an industry that it's kind of the first one out the gate. It has a market edge over another competitor. This could be with any OEM, and that ends up resulting sometimes in these circumstances where maybe it hasn't been 100% tested. It hasn't been on the market for a long time. It's not something it's brand new. It has just come out, and us as consumers, we are okay with that. Like we buy a vehicle if it gets recalled for some safety. A great example of this is like airbags. A lot of airbags got recalled. They had to be replaced. So with that, people seem to be okay that their vehicle is going to go in, it's going to get fixed, and it's going to get fixed to the way that they want it, and it's going to be safer in the end. But we seem to be okay with that. In more of a utility industry, when you're talking about those life or death circumstances where a failure of equipment could electrocute somebody or the public or a line crew or something like that, the tolerance for that risk is not there, and it shouldn't be there. So you have these two huge actors in the industry space. You have the utility on this side, and you have the vehicle OEMs on this side. And now with vehicle to grid, you're having those two come together, but there's a little bit of a clash of business operations and how they go about what each one does in their own space.
And you mentioned a very specific example that I thought kind of spelled that out really clearly. When you have dealerships of buses, in this case, school buses in this case, selling these buses, the charging infrastructure, or noting or referring that charging infrastructure to like high-speed DC charging, when in actuality that could create demand charge and bill problems for the client, right? And then you had said there's a certain suite, perhaps a formula of high-speed and conventional level 2 charging that may be a better mix, but there needs to be education on the dealership side, or they need to have interest aligned somehow. I mean, I guess my question with that type of a problem is what's the optimal rollout strategy for school buses, which creates all the value we just talked about. Our kids are not walking through plumes of diesel with electric school buses, and it creates opportunities for the grid. And how do we create solutions for that?
So a lot of what holds the industry back is that the infrastructure costs are so expensive. So there you see utilities, including Hawaiian Electric, in 5 of the Hawaiian Islands. They have a make-ready program that they will help fund some of the infrastructure that is very costly. In addition to that, there's power requirements that need to be met for charging the vehicle, but also having the amount of electricity that you need to run the charger at the site. A lot of people jump immediately to, I need a high-speed charger because especially in the school bus space, there's still a lot of range anxiety. A lot of drivers haven't had a ton of experience with electric vehicles. They may not own one. They may never have driven one. They may never have plugged in.
It's kind of ironic because they know exactly where they're going. It's not changing. You prove it out a couple of times, it should be okay.
Yeah, but it's getting them familiar with that new device and that new way of driving and regenerative braking and being able to make the most of the vehicle. But the other part of that is that we feel like instead of waiting or stopping your efforts altogether for fleet electrification, because you don't have the infrastructure or because the infrastructure is costly, we feel like there's a phased-in approach that you can install some charging now. You can probably get a lot of your charging needs met without having to go really high power. I mentioned to you before that, in the high-speed environment, those assets are so expensive and costly, and they're good, but at the same time, you often don't get one charger per vehicle. You share a charger amongst many vehicles. The difficulty with that is once that staff member or whoever is running the transportation, managing the transportation, once they leave for the day, if that expensive, that more expensive infrastructure is plugged into the bus, it's so expensive that you can't afford one plug per bus. So then that's it until somebody comes back the next day and either moves the vehicle, puts it in, plugs in another vehicle. With lower level charging, that's much less expensive, a tenth of the cost maybe, you can actually afford to have more dispensers, more ports, and you can plug in one per bus and walk away and remotely control that charging environment. And then in addition, now there's a lot of talk around automated load management or load management, site load management, where you're taking a ceiling energy capability that you might have on your existing transformer, and that's the energy available to that site, and you can either put it all towards one vehicle, you can distribute it across many devices, and so you can actually take advantage of charging even though you might not have the highest capability at the site, but still be able to for the most part, you should be able to meet your needs.
So you're talking about eliminating some of the infrastructure expenses up front, that big CapEx that people are scared about, yes, by toggling loads essentially and using the peaks you already have or the capacity you already have to handle either one vehicle at a time or multiple vehicles at lower power amounts.
Yeah, and we do see this across the nation. So in Hawaii, we're very lucky, right? We live in a very desirable climate as far as we don't have a lot of change in temperature. You've got 10 degrees here and there, maybe, on a regular basis. Of course, you have the extremes, but in other places in the nation, they fluctuate 80 degrees. You're talking about Colorado going from, or someplace like that where you have harsh winters, maybe negative temperatures, which really affects battery range and the capability to charge the vehicle. And so you've got to factor in that in addition to, how are you using that vehicle and where are you driving? So for that reason, you have to have you can't just do a cookie cutter approach because it can be very geographically different based on the power that's available, where you're located. Is it an urban or a rural area? What are the infrastructure that's already existing? What needs to be upgraded? So there's a lot of things that go into play and a lot of decisions that need to be made that you can't just what we do in Hawaii can just be transported over to Chicago, or Illinois, where you have a completely different situation, and those requirements need to take into account some of those things. So that means we would advocate for, and this would be the same for pretty much any transportation provider, have some high-speed capability, but also have some lower speed capability so that you can be grid assistive. Don't add to the peak where you come back at the end of the school day route at 4:30, and you're plugging in right at that peak time where you're going to have that vehicle charge when everybody else is on the grid. And then in what we call Kona conditions here, which is cloudy, humid, not a lot of renewable generation, no wind, those conditions, AC requirements go way up. There could be generation shortfalls because you're not now having the renewable energy that you used to have. And we don't want those buses to come back and then add to something like that and result in, less efficient generation. Even if it's charging off the grid, we don't want to have to use peaker units where the generation is much less efficient and more emissions are caused. So it's one of those things where we do a lot of assistance in this space, trying to really map out, what are your needs, what can you do, what are the unintended consequences, or what are the consequences if you choose this type of charger, this type of vehicle,
Unintended consequences.
Yes.
As you were saying that, I was thinking that you guys are making sure to minimize unintended consequences in what otherwise has tremendous potential. There's so much we could talk about here, but I would just ask you one last thing. Do you have a message for people, organizers or participants of Hawaii Energy Conference 2024? Anything you'd like to say? Any of your experience about the conference?
Yeah, I think what's fantastic about being here in Hawaii is that we do have so much renewable energy that's already part of the grid. So there are times in the middle of the day when you are seeing in excess of 75% renewable. We have a long way to go. It's that last part that is really difficult, but we're really out front when it comes to these things. It's a great place to be because everybody here is kind of speaking the same language. When you're in Hawaii and you're from Hawaii and you have PV on your roof and you have an electric vehicle and an electric vehicle charger, that is a lot of people here in the islands, and there's a lot of familiarity that moves everybody forward really fast. And you can see what makes Hawaii such a great place for this is that you can also do some of these things that allow you to experiment without humongous investments because you're part of 3 huge grids that are all tied together with a independent system operator that has market pricing between different generation sources. Yeah. Here in Hawaii, you can, each island is its own grid. So and in a place like Molokai or Lanai, your grid is tiny. So anything that you do there can have a huge effect and very quickly, like you can see it.
Well, that's a great closer, my friend. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, Gregg. I really appreciate it. And this is Hawaii Energy Conference 2024, Day 2. Aloha.